Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And with me today, over a 40-mile stretch of fibre optic cable, is Mr. Ken Kelly. How's the fibre optic at your end, Ken?
Today it is relatively good. I must say that over the summer break, we had some rain, which was a little heavier than normal, I guess, for my area. And that was it. The fibre optics all went down and we had the engineers out and the roads up. So, yeah, we've had some fun with that. But glad to be here today. And I'm just mindful that this is episode number 21. And I guess 21 in some cultures is a symbol of a coming of age.
It is. Do I get the key to the door now, Ken?
So, a great episode, the 21st episode of Counselling Tutor Podcast. We're going to be kicking off with asking about questions in person-centered counselling and looking at what happens when the client asks us questions. What do we do as therapists? We're going to be going into theory with Rory. And Rory, you've got a really interesting topic today. Can you just give us just the taster of what you're going to be bringing us?
Yeah, we're going to be revisiting transference, and we're going to be looking at erotic and eroticised transference. So quite interesting, where the client may kind of have romantic or even amorous thoughts about the therapist. Yeah,
and that is a really interesting topic that you're going to be, and I've certainly got something that I can share when we get to that, Rory. And with person-centered business today, we're going to be looking at how you distill down what it is that you do. So to give you an example of that is, if you were writing a write-up in a counselling directory to advertise your services as a counsellor or a psychotherapist, how can you use the minimum amount of words to be the most effective in putting over what it is that you offer? So kind of the elevator pitch, I guess it's called in sales, but we're going to be having a look at that. And then we've got a really interesting topic to end off with. And that's, I guess, about breaks in between your clients. If you're just going into practice and you're finding that that's wearing you out, that's to be expected. This is all brand new. So about pacing yourself, breaks between clients, and just looking at care for self, I guess. But kicking off, questions in person-centered therapy. I think, Rory, this was brought up once again on the Counselling Tutor Facebook group.
Absolutely. And if you're wondering what the heck Ken's talking about, Counselling Tutor Facebook group, go to our website, www.counsellingtutor.com. 2 L's, we spell it in the British English way. And if you click the tab that says Facebook, we have a thriving community of learners and practitioners and sub-tutors talking about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And as part of that, people sometimes ask questions. So if you want to join us, click on that. It is a closed group. Knock on the door, we'll let you in, and you can join the world of students talking about their experiences. But yes, questions in person-centered therapy. It's a really interesting question. And what I would say is that the thing we kind of suffer with, and I'm going to be really direct, is Roger's legacy. Because if you look at the way that Carl Rogers worked, he was, based in California. He was in the 1960s and 1970s. Yep. His clients were in that mindset, 1960s. They were, I suspect, like-minded people. And what it gives us is this view of how we should do it. And Rogers, to be fair to him, never, ever kind of said, this is how it should be done. He never left us a template and said, this is how you have to be. And in fact, he promoted people being their own people. So answering questions, I think it depends on the question. If someone says, if I'm having a break with a client and I say I'm going on holiday, I'll be on leave on holiday, and they say, where are you going? I might say Blackpool, if I'm going to Blackpool. Now, I think that's a fair response because it's a human relationship. I think I personally would feel a bit weird if I said to the client, I wonder why you're interested in where going on holiday, because the client might think, this guy's a weirdo.
Yeah, so you're speaking about self-disclosure there in a way, aren't we? And it's when so there's two different sides to questioning. There's obviously the questions that we might ask, the appropriate questions in our skills when we're working with a client. And if you want any more in-depth information on that, just head on back to podcast episode number 7, where that is covered in depth. But today we're focusing more on what happens when the client asks us something about us. How much do we show? And I guess in person-centered therapy, we're encouraged to be congruent and fully there. But at the same time, I guess our learning teaches us that we don't put our whole selves in because this is about the client's journey. So I get that it's a tightrope, but I hear exactly what you're saying, Rory. And if a client asks you a direct question and you start dancing around, I wonder how they feel. But there are times where you might dance around, or where you might evade that question. But something simple, where you're going on holiday. I'm going to Blackpool, which is a rather rainy town in the north of England. If you're listening from outside of the country, not many people, actually loads of people go to Blackpool, don't they? They've got a fun fair there.
Yeah, and you make a good point, Ken, because there are times when clients will ask you direct questions, and I've had it in my practice. What would you do? How do you find love? If you're in my shoes, what would you do? And those are the questions really where your own self-disclosure isn't really useful in my view, because you're not the client and it's all about the client. So in cases like that, I would be very polite, and I would say, I understand you may be interested in how I deal with it, but I'm not you. And I guess we're here to talk about you and find out how you might deal with it, and work with it on that. But sometimes clients, and make no mistake, will see the therapist as someone who's sorted out, as almost a kind of messiah-like figure, that their lives are totally in tune and totally zen. And of course, anybody knows any therapist's life will know that's not the case, So I think in terms of questions, if you're in private practice and someone says, how much is that? You wouldn't say to them, I wonder how much you think it is. 100%. There are times when you've just got to be congruent and answer a question. It depends on the degree of self-disclosure. What say you, Ken?
When you were saying that, what was very apparent to me, it's about empowering and maybe removing power from the client. So if a client was to say, what do you think I should do? If you were to give any advice or any guidance on that, that's taking the power away from the client to find their own way.
Great.
So you bringing part of self in. So I guess it's about balancing that out. And I guess the other side of it is when the client says, where do you go out to on a Friday night? And that might even actually lead into the next topic that you're going to be talking about, Rory. But we might be questioning why they would be interested in knowing where we might be going in our personal time and in our private lives. So I guess it's an interesting one, and it's one that I, again, as we always do, encourage that you discuss with your peers, bring it up with your tutor, discuss it, talk about it, think about it. That's what Counselling Tutor Podcast is about. It's about us getting us to think. And at the end of the day, this is your practice, and you're going to make the decisions that best fit you. For me, I am a person-centered therapist, and there are times when I bring part of self into the relationship when I feel that it is appropriate. And again, it's when I feel that it is appropriate. So, that's a whole new discussion about the helicopter, where you would be kind of in process with the client, but you have one foot outside of that, almost a helicopter looking down on the relationship. And it comes with experience, I guess, Rory. It comes with being in practice and being with clients and feeling comfortable. It's a really interesting topic.
It is. And my barometer is, I always think if a client asks me a direct question, part of me, and that's that helicopter that's kind of overlooking the relationship. I always say, why are they asking me that question? So I'll give you a good example about how I would work with that. If someone said to me, where do you live? I would say, I live in Moseley. Everybody knows that. If they said which street, that's then becomes a different conversation.
Yeah.
And I think we have to separate off. And I think the other thing that we need to be very keenly aware of is American kind of social norms and hello to our friends in the States, because we do have viewers in the States. American social norms are different to British. They're subtly different. So where, and I'm not talking about the whole 248 million Americans, because I've never met them all, but I work for an American company, and it was noticeable that in American culture, it was slightly different in the way they talked about themselves socially than it is in UK. And the other thing I would say is, I'm from the north of England, Ken, and we're different to our friends in the south of England. Yes. So I think you have to bring in, what I'm getting to, maybe a little clumsily here, is that you have to bring in the social kind of etiquette that the society you live in has, and your wider society, the social norms. So, or memes, that's the latest thing, isn't it? Memes, social norms, social memes. So yeah, questions. It's an interesting question.
It is. And I'm going to just end it here, because we've got so much more to cover. But there's one thing that I did want to share. Sometimes when you're studying and you get how we can reflect or dodge certain questions that come in, where we might hand that back and say, well, I don't know. I wonder what you think of that, or I wonder how you might deal with that. And we think that's a pretty smart and clever way of dodging the question. It's really interesting that I've had a number of clients that have shared with me that they've been in therapeutic relationships, and they say there's nothing worse than when they can see the therapist using some kind of like a technique to dodge the question. And I wonder what happens at a deeper level within that therapeutic relationship. And it's just the thought. Again, this is just a debate. It's for you to decide at the end of the day. So we'll park the questions there as we move on to your topic that you're going to be bringing in Theory with Rory today. Just paint us a picture of this, Rory, because it's an interesting topic.
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I've talked about erotic and eroticized transference before with my good friend Bob Cook. And one of the things that can happen is that clients can fall in love with their therapists, and vice versa. And there's some really interesting research that was carried out a few years ago, and a higher proportion of male therapists kind of have romantic feelings towards their female clients than women do. But what I'm talking about is the opposite, where a client is coming, and maybe part of their journey has been about pleasing people sexually. So clients who've been in neglectful or abusive relationships may have used that part of them as currency, shall we say, and also about clients who may be coming for a different outcome. In other words, they're not coming for therapy, but they're using it as a dating agency. And what I would say is this is sometimes subconscious. And one of the other things I'd say is part of being a therapist is showing that humanistic love to your clients. And there's different forms of loving. In fact, there's a book called The Art of Loving, written by Eric Fromm. So if you get a copy of that, maybe we'll put a link to that in the show notes. And it talks about a different form of love of country, passionate love of children. They're all love, but they're all subtly different. And sometimes clients can get confused with that. So we have to be aware that if that comes up, how to deal with it and what it might look like. So erotic and eroticized transference.
I look forward to this, and I did say that I would share something, and all I'm going to share very briefly is that I remember once taking a situation to supervision, and I never wore my wedding ring, and I just don't wear it because it's not me. I see it as a symbol, and I know I'm married, and my wife knows I'm married. I don't need to wear it for anything. But after supervision, it was suggested that I maybe wear my wedding ring in one of my sessions with a certain client. So it certainly has come up, and it's just really interesting. But let's go a little bit deeper into this, and let's listen to Theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees Oakes.
Before I start this section of the show, I want to make you aware that I'll be discussing areas in psychotherapy with themes of a sexual nature. One of the challenges of producing a podcast that covers the human condition is that sometimes we need to explore real issues which are raised in the therapy room and not shy away from them. So if you are listening in the car or at home where other people are around and want to take a view on the suitability of the material for a wider audience, i.e. little ears, then maybe listen in private and come to your own conclusion. So with the disclaimer taken care of, one of the subjects that comes up a lot in training is the fear that a client may be sexually attracted to the therapist. And yes, it does sometimes happen. While it is an understandable concern, it's easy to work with if the therapist understands the motivation of the client and has a strategy to work with it. Clients come to us with a wide range of issues such as anxiety, depression, and sometimes unfulfilled sexual needs and desires. Like any client presentation, we need to be resilient enough to be able to work with the material while being thoughtful enough to retain our boundaries. Client sexual projections fall under the umbrella term of transference, which I've covered in episode 3 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. But just to remind us, transference is the process of taking elements from a past relationship, place or event and overlaying them onto the present. Countertransference is where we react to that past situation in the here and now. So for example, a client mentions that you look like a teacher they did not like at school. The transference is they become childlike in your presence as they see you not as you, but the teacher from their history. Countertransference would be where you become irritated by the client's childlike ways and act like the teacher they remember. Both transference and countertransference is largely subconscious process. However, by being aware that it exists, we can pick up on both the client's and our own behavioural responses in the therapy room. So how do we work with clients who may bring highly sexualised material? Well, as ever, it comes down to our own self-awareness of sexual material and sex in general, and also what the client is wanting from us. This can be split down into 2 areas of transference, and the first is called erotic transference. The term is generally used where the client is exploring their sexual fantasies and desires. It is possible they may use the therapist as a sounding board to explore issues of sexual preference that may be unavailable for exploration anywhere else. Erotic transference is grounded in reality, where the client understands that a sexual or romantic feelings towards the therapist is unrealistic, and the transference does not affect the client's ability to achieve the goals of therapy or develop a mature attachment style to others. In this case, the therapist needs to consider their own process and what feelings the client's erotic process has on them. This can be explored in supervision or personal therapy. So sometimes what can happen is a client may flirt with you or say things of a sexual nature. It may be they're just testing the ground to do this in their wider circles. They may use it as a way of exploring how they build sexual relationships. But it can be a bit off-putting for the therapist because the therapist may feel under pressure or, to be quite frankly, maybe quite aroused by the idea that someone is talking in this way to them. So it needs a lot of self-reflection and also supervision and sometimes personal therapy if it becomes overwhelming. It depends on the processes that are being generated within the therapist. But generally speaking, erotic transference is grounded in reality. In other words, the client knows that there isn't going to be a relationship of anything other than a therapeutic relationship. On the other hand, eroticised transference is where the client is attending therapy for a different outcome, that of falling in love and engaging in a sexual relationship with the therapist. This is characterised as overt, it's ego-driven and demands both love and sexual fulfilment from the client to the therapist. The client is unable to develop personal self-awareness and is only attending to be close to the therapist. In cases like this, the therapist may need to challenge the client to what they may think may be going on, and if the client continues the same presentation, consider a respectful referral to another therapist. So what can happen here is it becomes quite obvious that what's being spoken about in the therapy room is absolutely nothing to do with therapy or personal change. It's more the fact that the client is basically chatting you up. and he's being overt, asking you directly, would you go out with them or see them in another setting, or maybe even sleep with them. That can happen. So it's obviously about boundaries, and it's also about thinking about how you'll work with that if that happens. One final thought: it's worth considering what drives erotic transference. Sometimes clients who have been subject to prolonged grooming and sexual abuse are conflicted when meeting someone who takes a genuine interest in them. So if someone has been groomed and sexually abused for a long time, it may be that their self-worth is just around their sexuality or what sexual favours can be offered. And this is sometimes called sexualizing. In other words, someone only sees their value in their ability to be a sex object, quite frankly. And sometimes that is an area of therapy that they need to work on, and a therapist may very well want to kind of stop the client in the tracks and explore that, go directly to explore that, and see if the client can see themselves in any other way but sexualized. And this does happen, and it's quite interesting. In the case of Rolf Harris, the entertainer who was imprisoned for being a predatory paedophile, he was asked at one point by the defence barrister when he had started taking an interest in a girl that lived on the same estate within his house. He had a big house and he had another house on the land that his house was on, so a separate house. And he started from about 11 or 12 years old. And he basically conditioned the child into thinking that she was a sexual object. And quite tellingly, the barrister said to him, "You trained her like you would a puppy." And to which he replied, "Yes." So in cases sometimes like that, the clients can only believe that they can be loved if they offer a sexual part of themselves. And in those cases, that needs very careful and thoughtful work, and also a very strong boundary with the therapist, and also the therapist understanding their reaction and their own process to being propositioned, because it could be highly flattering. So that's erotic and eroticised transference. And one final thing, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a book by Eric Fromm called The Art of Loving, and it's just a wonderful book. It can be picked up off eBay for a few pounds, UK pounds, and it explains the different forms of love that humans can give each other and offer each other, and it can be very, very handy in reorientating clients into thinking about what is appropriate love for the situation they find themselves in.
Thank you so much, Rory. Always insightful, always informative. And again, the word transference. You can't underestimate transference and the importance of supervision. Very grateful that you shared that topic with us.
Well, thanks, Ken. And it is a fascinating subject, one that comes up more than once in practice life.
Yeah. So we're moving on now to person-centered business. Person-centered business is basically where we look right now during our studies at what it might look like when we finish our studies, when we need to go out into that big wide world and find work as a practicing therapist or psychotherapist, or perhaps even private practice. And today I thought that I would look at how we describe what it is we do, how we describe our services. And it's more difficult than you think. So if you had to describe what you do in one small paragraph, what would those words say? And you're going to use this more often than you might consider that you might use it. For instance, if you were putting a listing on a counselling directory, you would have a very short space or a small amount of space to say what it is you do and stand out maybe from the other counsellors or psychotherapists. So you're looking for your USP, your unique selling point, in a small bite, or an elevator pitch as it's sometimes called. So let's go and look at that in a little bit more depth in Person-Centered Business.
Person-Centered Business with Kenneth Kelly.
As a counsellor or psychotherapist, you're in competition. You're in competition with other people that are offering a similar service. Whether you like it or not, at the end of the day, you're engaging in some form of sales. Even if that's just putting a listing together for a counselling directory to say what it is that you do, or it may be bigger than that in terms of maybe putting together a brochure that you might leave around or putting some words on your website. And today I wanted to focus down on identifying who you are, what kind of clients you're able to help, and what your unique selling point is in the minimum possible words. And this is ideal for something like a counselling directory listing, where you have to make an impact, stand out from the rest of the therapists in the minimum amount of words. There are some steps that we can follow. This is in business called an elevator pitch. All companies use it. And as counsellors, we are no different if we're providing a service professionally, and we need to be looking to the marketing techniques that are used by big business and using them, because that is how services are put forward to consumers, is what we're used to seeing. So step one of defining who you are and what you offer is very simply to define who you are. And to do this, I encourage you to maybe get a piece of paper and write down a sentence of who it is that you are. And what I mean by that is in terms of the service that you offer. So you may say, I am a counsellor in private practice. Step two is to describe what it is that you do. So you're going to look to your philosophy, you're going to maybe look to your modality, and you're going to explain that. And I encourage you to use no more than 2 sentences. So 1 to 2 sentences to write what it is that you actually do. So to give you an example that I use, I put that I aim to offer you a safe, supportive and confidential setting to explore the issues that you are struggling with. So there you go. You're going to put down yours. You're going to describe what it is that you do. The next step that you want to do is to identify your ideal client or customer. So we call them clients, but at the end of the day, if they're paying money, they are a customer. And we need to identify that we can't work with everybody. So it's about looking at your skill sets. I don't work with couples because I don't have the training to work with couples. So I would want to make that very clear in my introductory paragraph, in my elevator pitch, who I work with. So I would be looking to include my modality, potentially, and I would definitely be looking to geographically locate myself, so to kind of anchor myself geographically so that I'm not getting contacted, or my listing is not going to come up for people that are outside my geographical area, because it would not be a match for them. It would be a waste of their time getting in contact with me only to be told that I'm too far out of their area. So for mine, I provide a private counselling service in Warrington, Cheshire, and counselling clients from Grappan Hall, Stockton Heath and Lymm. So I really have said what it is that I do, and I've said the areas that I work with, and those areas mean something to people that live in and around my area. Step 4 is you're going to explain what is unique or different about you and your service. And this is really important because this is kind of what differentiates you from the other people that might be also placing a listing quite close to yours. What is it that you can say that you do? Maybe it's your approach. Maybe it is your qualifications. Maybe it is the target audience or group that you specialize in working with. It's important to bring that into that descriptive paragraph. Get it right in there, right at the beginning. So you're saying who you are, what you do, who your ideal customer is, and why they should take notice of you. In other words, why they should care and take their time to get in touch with you. Step 5 is to consider what you want them to do next. And it's called a CTA, or a call to action. Right there in your descriptive paragraph, you want to say, this is what I need you to do. And that may be as simple as, to get in touch, simply email me at, or to get in touch, please call during office hours. It's to give them something that you need them to do to be able to contact you. So your call to action is really important, and you need to have it right there at the very top in that descriptive paragraph. And the reason for that is if somebody has clicked maybe on your listing and they have a bit of a read there and they go, yeah, you know what, I feel a resonance with this person. What you don't want to do is have them scrolling and seeking out your number or your contact details. So make sure that they're really clear and you give them distinctive directions of what they need to do to be able to contact you, to get into touch with you. And then step 6 is to create an attention-getting hook. And what we're looking for here is we're looking for something that is going to make the listing stand out. Maybe a headline, maybe on many of the listing sites to give you the opportunity to put a headline down. And what works really well is a headline that maybe asks a question or maybe makes a statement about what it is that you offer. It might say client-centered private counselling. It may say safe confidential counselling. It may say need to talk ? So it's about what can you put as an attention grabber, something that is maybe going to get the person to stop scrolling through the list of all the different counsellors and take note of your listing. And really important to go along with that is add a picture. Very often a counselling directory will give you the opportunity to add a picture, and very often people do not add a picture. And I feel that sometimes a client is more likely to click when they do see a picture, when they can see the face behind the name. It kind of gives them a connection. And at the end of the day, counselling is built on person-to-person relationships. So I think having a picture and a really good headline or hook or attention-grabbing sentence right at the top that kind of explains who you are, distills down your offer, is really useful. And these things don't come easy. It's about put this down on your piece of paper. You're now at that step 6 attention grabbing hook or sentence. The step 7 is putting that all together. So it's to take all those different elements and to bring them together using ands, buts, and thes, and try to craft that down. And once you've written it, go over it again and see, can I lose any words and say the same thing? So you want to be looking to use the minimum amount of words to say what you have just been through. So just to recap over them, you're going to, step 1, define who you are. Step 2, you're going to describe what it is that you do. Step 3, you're going to identify your ideal client, geographical location, and find who they are, who it is that you choose to work with, who you will be able to give your best to. Step 4, you're going to explain what is unique and different about you and the service that you offer. And in step 5, you're going to let them know what they need to do next to be able to get in contact with you. And step 6, you're going to create that attention-grabbing hook. And it's interesting that step 6 is the attention-grabbing hook or sentence. That's going to go right at the top. It's going to kind of be the headline, as it were. Like a newspaper headline gets people to pay attention, so your attention-grabbing hook is going to get people to pay attention to your descriptive paragraph that explains what it is that you do as a counsellor and psychotherapist. And I really hope that when you come to put yours together, that you find this information useful.
So useful. Even there might be people listening to this think, well, I'm not, in private practice yet, but great tips for assignment writing in there as well.
Yeah.
The times I've seen students use 500 words when 4 would do. It's a really good discipline. And one of the reasons, of course, that academic writing is strict in things like word counts is because exactly what you're talking about. It's about you're going to have to go into the world and you're going to have to write copy and you're going to be restricted on your words. You need to get your point across and make it articulate. So thanks for that, Ken. Brilliant.
Absolute pleasure, and hopefully you'll find that useful. So we're now having a look at a topic, and again, another topic that was brought up on the Facebook group within the community, and it's regarding when you take those first steps into practice and how that feels and how draining and emotionally draining that can be, how many clients you should be seeing, what should be the time gaps in between those clients. What are your thoughts on this, Rory?
Well, it's tricky. You've got to work in the real world, and sometimes the way that agencies are, and certainly if you're working, for a provider in paid work for a company, you may very well be expected to do clients back to back. But let me share you a little story that stuck with me from my practice life. When I was a volunteer counsellor when I was a student, I can remember sitting waiting for a room to become vacant, and at say 5 o'clock, the door opened, the client came out, clearly distressed. It had been clearly for her a tough session. And the counsellor, who was a man, stood at the door. And he stood, and when the client had kind of exited the building, he just looked into the middle distance and he went, he kind of breathed out.
Yeah.
And he looked completely, it was that, they call it the 1,000-yard stare, where someone's kind of staring into the middle distance, not at anything particular. And you could just get that had been a really, really tough session. Mm-hmm. And we need time to recover. And sometimes we don't get the luxury of it. But my view is that it depends on what the client brings and your reaction to it. That's the key thing. Yeah. Some clients can bring really hard, tough material. You can come away from it, and it could be, I'm okay at this point. I can go on to the next client. They may say something, and it comes down again and again to our old friend, transference.
Yeah. It's a tricky one because it can be draining. You're giving 100% of yourself. You're fully there in a client's frame of reference, being there with them in the material that they're bringing and going, I guess, in a way through the emotions. And the important thing here is when you look at the definition of empathy, and it's often referred to as walking in someone else's shoes, but there's a very important part in there, and that important part is as if. Rogers stresses this word a lot, as if it were your life. It isn't your life. It is their life. It is their material. So you are there as if. And when they walk out, they take with them their life. So anything that you are left with, and I do understand we're left with stuff, that's why we have supervision. I guess it's about examining how to park that so that you can be fully there with the next client that walks in, because each client... I guess, deserves our full attention and our full integration and fully being there for them. And it can be tricky. It can be tricky in those early days. It really can, when a client brings weighty material and they leave it there in the room with you and they walk out and you look around and you just see this heavy material, and 5 minutes later you've got another client coming in. So it's about having a think, first and foremostly, about care for self. If you're in an agency or any kind of setting where you're finding that this is a strain or difficult for you, go and speak to your practice manager immediately and look for a little bit of a gap there. You need to be looking to yourself first, and of course take it to supervision. But it's a big ask. It's a big ask, especially those early days, Rory.
It is. And I have a little technique that I still use. I was taught this on my first introduction course by my former tutor, who lives literally across the valley. Out of the studio window, I could see her house about 1.5 miles away, right across the valley. And she had an invisible filing cabinet in her practice room. And at the end of the session, the client would leave, she would sit down, she would physically act out getting a pile of papers, even if there's no papers there, but she's imagining putting papers in a folder, and that's the client's material and everything that she is feeling. She puts that in the folder. She physically gets up, or I physically get up. I walk across the room and I open an invisible filing cabinet and I put it in the invisible filing cabinet. I shut it and then I walk out. And I found that if it's real hard hitting stuff, and I think I'm really going to have to kind of park this, that's a technique I use. And for me, it actually works.
I think that is a really good idea, because you're physically, you've got a process in place to take and park that material, at least for a little while, and you might label it for supervision. If it's really heavy and you think, wow, I can't put that down, just put a big label on it saying for supervision, which means I am going to look at that a little bit later. And it's a great technique, because it kind of, I guess, gives us gestalt, gives us completeness that we are going to be dealing with that. I like that. That is really good. And I guess when you're going into practice, when you're going into your placement, definitely worth having a chat with your agency about what your client load is going to be. Of course, the BACP have their recommended maximum client load for students. You need to be having a look at what that is, to give you the respectful time in between clients to process, to maybe make your notes. I remember working at one stage and I was seeing 6 clients pretty much one after another within a setting that I was working. And it was tricky because I didn't have enough time to make the notes in between the clients. And I found it quite a muddle after seeing 6 clients to untangle the material to make the notes. So it's really worth having a look and a think.
Absolutely. And also a few other things we can do to support ourselves. One is, if you feel that there is stuff coming up, book an early supervision. That can always pay a dividend. And also, if there's a theme, this is something to take to your personal therapy. This is something to take to your personal therapy and work through. Don't underestimate how clients' material can trigger us, can impact on us, and we need to take care of ourselves. It's an ethical responsibility, and hey, we're worth it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have the luxury now in private practice to put time in between my clients, and I will put in a minimum of 15 minutes. And sometimes I'll put in a 30-minute break in between clients where I can process, make my notes, change gear, and prepare and anticipate the arrival of the next client. I know that some agencies, and you started this, Rory, by saying within the real world, some agencies are under pressure to see a certain amount of clients in a certain amount of time. They have waiting lists, and it can be challenging. And I would echo what Rory has said and suggest speak with your practice manager, because they're going to be managing your load that is coming into you, and speak with your supervisor, speak with your tutor. If you're feeling you're taking strain and stress during your placement, that's not really the idea. You should be supported during your placement. So definitely be having a look at that and be vocal and tell people about it. And of course, continue this conversation as you've already started it on the Counselling Tutor Facebook group. We'd love to hear how you manage your caseloads, and is it tiring?
Yeah, absolutely. And looking after ourselves is really, really important. So that brings us to the end of the Counselling Tutor podcast for today. We've covered so much, Ken. So as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
And until we meet again in episode 22, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.